Okay, all right, so the next one is basically analyzing some organic compounds, and really we're going to focus on paint. This is going to be a pretty quick one. I'm going to let you guys read through some of the details yourself, but obviously we need to spend time on yet another piece of evidence. It might be trace evidence, but nonetheless, if there's any paint chips, any paint scrapes from maybe automobile accidents and crimes, that paint can be analyzed and can be used as evidence. So just a couple of things about paint. It is organic or contains organic compounds. And again, that's not like, oh, I bought it from Whole Foods, it's organic. No, it means it contains carbon, okay? But a couple things about the paint that you can read about here. The pigments, obviously, is what gives the paint its color. Binders are basically things that hold the paint together, kind of give it a smooth texture when you roll it on. Solvents dissolve the components and they evaporate upon drying, which I read right here. And the additives provide special properties for easy cleanup and stuff like that. So there's different additives that are added into certain paints to give them particular qualities. Okay, maybe a little bit more sheen, maybe anti-rust, stuff like that can be analyzed. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you guys, I don't paint like this. I love to paint my house. I paint all walls that I can. But it's saying that basically, you know, you would do these 4 different layers. Well, it depends on what you're painting, right? But sometimes you'll find these layers, and it's good to know, especially as a forensic scientist, how people paint. So if it's an outside type of kind of a painting, you might see these 4 coats. The first one would be a primer type of thing that would cover up the existing paint, allow the new paint to stick to it. Oh, sorry, the first one goes on metal though, depending on if you have metal. Then you'd go to the regular primer, then you might go to a color coat, and then sometimes if you're in a place that there's a lot of weathering, you might want a clear coat. So it's just good to know how paint is applied, because you might find some of these layers as a forensic scientist that you might have to identify, you might have to analyze, and then compare those with some other samples as well. Okay, so paint chips are definitely transferred during many crimes. Whether it's breaking in of a door, a window, automobile kind of crimes where there's maybe a hit and run, different things like that, that paint samples can be taken. Okay, and this person obviously is carefully taking that paint sample with scalpels, because you don't want to, some of those paint chips could crumble. You want to preserve as much of the evidence as possible, okay? All right, so analyzing paint. Now, here's where I'm not going to go into super detail for all of this, but you guys have to know that there are so many ways to analyze paint. Again, another facet of forensic science that you can take, you know, this maybe love for paint, well, not necessarily, but love for just kind of analyzing small details, and you can analyze, you know, colors and pigments and match them up to maybe a sample that was taken from a suspect's home or something like that. So one of the ways is something called light microscopy. Okay, so that's one way that we can basically analyze some of those paints. So here, let me go through this picture with you guys, and you guys can read this on your own. But it says, when one car hits another, paint evidence is exchanged. Okay, forensic scientists carefully analyze this evidence. So it says a light microscope is one way forensic scientists examine paint evidence. The scientists will try to see if the colors match. So they'll use these high-powered microscopes to really look at 2 different samples and see if that's a match. This microscope image shows the layers of paint in a chip. Forensic scientists compare these layers to the layers of a paint on a suspect's car. Okay, so there are a lot of ways that we can use these paint chips, paint smears, whatever it is, to kind of figure out what happened. They also may look at the torn edges of paint chips to see if it matches or lines up with something else of a suspect. Okay, so those are some ways that we use evidence, or use paint as evidence. But light microscopy is one way that we use, you know, a light microscope to kind of observe that paint chip or that paint sample a little bit more. There's also chemical tests that you can do. Maybe you want to know if this paint is oil-based or you know, acrylic or water-based. So there are 2 tests that you can do, but down here I really like this part. It says chemical tests destroy the samples. So they don't use these in, you know, like, oh, let's put the whole paint sample in here and see whether or not it's oil-based or not. But these ethanol tests, which you put it in ethanol or potassium hydroxide, will both, you know, let that person know, that forensic scientist know, whether or not it's an oil-based paint. Okay? Which again is just to match it up with other things. Okay, another way to analyze paint, okay, spectroscopy. When you hear spectroscopy, it's basically when you're analyzing the amount of light that's being absorbed by a particular sample of something. So the reason why we see color is because basically all other colors are absorbed except for the color that's being reflected back into your eye. So it's kind of interesting, and I could go into that in detail, but that would take forever. But the colors we see are because of the reflection, but all other colors are being absorbed. So spectroscopy, this is a type of chemical analysis based on a sample's absorption of light. Although there are many types of spectroscopy, they're all based on the same principle. So take, for instance, the color black. When you look at the color black, the reason why you see black is because all of those colors are actually being absorbed. So basically, based on this spectroscopy, when we analyze that further, we can really get a good example or a good idea of what wavelengths are being absorbed, because every single bit of light from the Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, those all have different wavelengths. So you can really kind of break that down into a really small way of saying what wavelengths are being absorbed by this color and compare it to another sample. Okay, and I'm not going to go through this. You guys can kind of check out how this works, a spectrophotometer, which basically is going to show you how that sample right here, which is that paint sample, is going to come up as far as what wavelengths have been absorbed and so forth in order to kind of compare and analyze that. All right, another way is spectroscopy. This is a different way, where basically it says a spectrometer outputs a spectrum that shows the wavelengths that have been absorbed by the sample. Often the pattern of wavelengths absorbed by a substance is unique to that substance. So here's just another way to analyze, okay? So I told you this would be pretty quick because you guys can kind of read through those details a little bit more, but there are just many ways to analyze paint. And you never thought that paint was that big of a deal, but it can be in a crime scene. Okay, and then the last part is basically chromatography. Okay, so it says paint is a mixture of compounds. Possible to analyze that mixture using pyrolysis, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry. Okay, how do you like that, right? Pretty crazy name, but again, it's a process that can really kind of analyze what is in those paints, and then therefore analyze another sample that can maybe possibly be a match and say that suspect is our guy, okay, or girl. All right, so there you have it. There's a little bit on analyzing paint. Please, again, read through the rest of your little mini lesson. There's another crime that's talked about in the very beginning of this lesson, and how that was used in paint analysis to figure out what happened and how and all that good stuff. Okay, so there you have it.